forward, there might be independent wineries where, Don might support Siduri, or I might support, or you might support Kapan, or we're all looking at some, each family member doesn't, quote unquote, only own the brands. They're ambassadors for those brands to try to help those brands keep and maintain some of these core values that Haley's talking about, moving in different directions with their wines, and the terroir of that area. They might also move in different directions in terms of how they might target their marketing or their appeal to different kinds of luxury consumers or classic wine consumers and that sort of thing. So
one thing I think is important, kind of what we're all kind of touching around the fringes of, and Haley said probably most succinctly, is the family is the thread that runs through, that is the glue. But also, just in the communication side of it, one thing we've considered, oftentimes, if it's about sustainability, for example, you want the subject of the sentence to be probably Jackson Family Wines, did or does, or if it's talking about who is the owner of the winery, we don't like it to be said Jackson Family Wines owns La Jolla. We want it to be read Jackson Family owns La Jolla. So that's one way we can make a distinction. Or if the wines of the Jackson family owns La Jolla, Le Cardinal. So almost every time when I read a sentence, I see Jackson Family Wines as the subject of it, I ask myself, could the subject better be set? This sentence better be constructed for our purposes if it read the Jackson Family instead of Jackson Family Wines, because you have the corporate kind of connotation that accompanies the Jackson Family Wines. It's a company name. It doesn't, of course you can read into it, and if you're familiar with it, you probably, know that and think that, but for people, it keeps kind of nailing, putting the hammer to that nail, driving the point home that it is a family, it isn't a great big company that's, Jackson Family Wines could be like Constellation that's owned by, multiple shareholders. When you say Jackson Family owns this.
We're the shareholders.
Yeah.
Our family.
4 people, so 5 people, whatever it is.
6.
So 6. Anyway.
Right now.
So anyway, again, probably we've harped on this a little bit too long, but it's I think something that we feel important is in going forward.
That's a great point. Substantial point, actually, to kind of push away from being registering as a big company that owns a bunch of stuff versus as a family that owns a lot of little beautiful wineries.
Right.
Is that something that you feel like you're pushing into like your corporate communications things? Or?
Well, we've been talking about it a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the whole point of this whole project, is to really capture the legacy piece, which hasn't, even the Jess films, we haven't captured it and maintained, and then sort of bring the first generation, for lack of a better term, of Barbara and Don and Jenny, really capturing that while we have going anywhere tomorrow. We haven't captured that. Doesn't really exist to the way.
So I always like to start with where we literally started, where this whole vineyard thing even got launched, and that was when Jess was a full-time practicing attorney, constitutional law, real property law, Fifth Amendment rights, eminent domain, and he was a specialist in inverse condemnation. And so he was practicing law and going to a conference in American Bar Association conference for condemnation attorneys in Hawaii. And he was he was always looking for property to own, because he grew up in a family where a lot of emphasis, his family from Texas, his grandmother, my great-grandmother, was really into farming when she moved to California from Texas when he was a boy. And so she was teaching him how to, raise chickens and, milk a cow, and, how to unfortunately, take care of the livestock and farm animals, for their food. So he learned a lot from her and from his family history and his parents. And I think, although he grew up in a very, metropolitan area of San Francisco, and, his parents had white collar jobs and everything, he always wanted to have a retirement place. I grew up hearing that since I was old enough to, get in the car and know where we were going to look at property. We were looking in Monterey. We were looking up in Lake County, Napa, Sonoma, all kinds of vineyards, but mainly looking at farmland, because before they got into wine. My parents always had cocktail parties back in the 50s and 60s, and all of the family would come. All of my aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins would come, and their friends, and they always had all of the various kinds of alcohol, but we always had wine. We always had wine at those parties, and I can remember seeing Wente and Mondavi and Sutter Home and Ficklin Port, and those kinds of things were always available. And even though my grandfather on my dad's side liked whiskey better, and bourbon better, and so did my mother's father, a lot of the family steered away from hard liquor, and they drank wine. But my parents don't remember that. Because I was the height that I could read a label, at 5 or 6 or 7, but it was always in the liquor cabinet, and the wine was laid down, and they would buy it for parties and that sort of thing. So I think my parents both had an interest in wine, and they were on this flight to Hawaii, and they met Hank Bartolucci and his wife Jewel, and they were owners of the family was owners of Oakville.
Great winery, whatever.
Oakville, what did they call it? Oakville. Well, it was an Oakville winery, but it was over there in Napa. And the brothers had had a dispute and kind of broken up the properties and divided it several ways. Hank's brothers, and he was interested in looking at property up in Lake County as an investment. Mondavi was getting a lot of their fruit from up there. There'd been wineries, award-winning wineries back in the late 1800s there in Lake County. So, and Lake County used to be part of Napa, used to be part of the same county, and got, I don't know why, divided up at one point. So my parents were talking with the Bartoluccis, and it turned out that the Bartoluccis were quoting studies done at UC Davis that indicated where walnut trees and pears grew well, so would vines, so would table wine grapes. So Jess started looking into that, and he eventually found this property up in Lake County on the advice of Hank Bartolucci. Hank was moving up there with his son, Ron Bartolucci, who became our first vineyard manager. And we planted grapes up there. We bought the property in '73. It was an old homestead of the Covey family that had come out on covered wagon in the late 1800s, mid 1800s. They brought fruit trees and livestock, and they didn't have enough water to keep their livestock alive, so they ate their livestock, and they fed the water to the trees. And so we still have up there some 150-year-old quince trees,
Big trees this big, right?
walnut trees, and some different fruit cherry trees. Unfortunately, our old fig tree died. It got some disease or something after 120 some odd years.
There's still one, though, on the corner of the property.
Yeah. So there are a lot of old fruit trees on this property, the original 80 acres that we purchased. So we purchased it in '73, right before I started college, when I was 17, and when I was 18, we were up there planting grapes. And that's where Laura and I spent every summer vacation, spring break, winter break. We were up at the Lakeport property helping to plant these grapes. And we tried to keep the pears, the pear orchard. There's 13 acres of pears remaining on the property, and just tried to do it organic. But it just didn't fly. They weren't sophisticated enough, and all of our neighbors complained that we were introducing pests into their, we were a population zone for pests. Apparently, because we weren't sulfuring and doing all the ordinary things, they used some pretty heavy